right? Weird, like, paradoxical line of thought, because you can't really. It's like, how do you encourage altruism without giving incentives when altruism's acting in spite of anything coming back to you? Like, how do you encourage altruistic behavior in a system like this? Like, philanthropy is one thing because it's like, like I'm giving, but I want to see something come of it. Whereas, yeah, I don't know. Like, there's all kinds of different ways to look at public goods, and I honestly think there's like a spectrum when it comes to like how public a thing is. Like, but yeah, I don't know. When it comes to libraries in particular, when I think about them too, I think about when I was a child and walking into a point of where just complete like liberation, complete imaginative freedom. But as an adult who's grown up poor and without like all kinds of stuff, the way I see libraries now is it's more than just a point of knowledge. It's in the U.S. at least, it's a point where a lot of people, it's their only like internet access. It's their only source to a lot of things within the world. And since I also kind of do Ethereum as a public good, it'd be nice to be able to have libraries as a way that people can connect into Web3, get proof of humanity set up, get onto UBI or something like that. And it'd be nice to have the actual public library infrastructure set up as a point of access to Web3. So people could walk in there, they can get their library card that functions as like an NFT, like an ERC 1155 or a charged particle or something like that. But also doubles as their first Ethereum wallet and gives them access to everything else, gives their online identity. Like everybody's real big on like ENS and Web3 logins, and how do we get that to where you don't need to use username passwords anymore? You just click sign in with Ethereum or whatever. But there's so many other physical infrastructure points. As like at least in the U.S., public libraries are already decentralized. Like there's not like a national library infrastructure. Like every public library has their own system, and then they connect to each other. However, from there, at least where I am at in the U.S. So I don't know. There's a lot you can look at from the physical public library infrastructure to learn from, to bring in to like a Web3 library. But I still am on the how do you encourage public participation in that? Like I want to, like there's so much opportunity in Web3 to pull in everyone. So like while libraries, in my opinion, are grossly underfunded and grossly undervalued, they can be shoved into like a more defined cornerstone of like of our culture, more or less. Especially in a global infrastructure, I think libraries could better connect us.
So yeah,
I don't know.
Let's dig down into this.
Sorry for the whole rant.
No, that was
libraries
great.
have just been on my mind forever.
I grew up in a public library, basically, so that's one reason why I think public goods are just really important to me personally, because I benefited so much from that experience as a child. And some of you know I've been trying to think through ideas for like how we could do learn to earn book clubs, where DAOs might even want to pay members or potential members to join the DAO and do a book club, because then you're building community, you're generating insights through the discussion, and you're also acquiring really great people who are going to contribute and giving them a social foundation to do so. And so I think that goes to I think we're getting somewhere. Like we're basically saying there's maybe 3 ways that you can try to tell people that there's a return on their investment in public goods, right? And the 3 ways would be financial capital, so like tokenization models. So like Clima, what they did, over the past 2 days, if you guys have seen it, they're basically trying to be a carbon sink where people just throw and deposit carbon credits. They'll lock the liquidity on that. No one will be able to take those out, and the price of carbon should just go up over time so that people are massively incentivized to get carbon credits, because they basically created this not quite Ponzi scheme, but definitely like a trick gaming to force the price of carbon up. And in return, people who participate in this will be hugely financially rewarded if it works. So financial incentives are one way, and I think Climb is really interesting, and we're going to see how this goes in doing that. The second way would be social capital, right? And that's saying there's some sort of status attached to that. I think Moonshot Bots for me is actually a really crucial one, because it's the first time we've had an NFT project that's really ties the status of the PFP to the fact that you've given rather than that you've earned, right? Like, yes, they're expensive, but a lot of them are very cheap to start. I think owning one of those is not about showcasing how rich you are. It's about the fact that you've given away money rather than what you've gotten, right? So we have financial capital, social capital, and then the third one would be just saying public goods are a great return for everyone, and therefore a great return for me as well, right? Like if I'm creating that public library where everyone is getting ETH, that's going to also just help the whole ecosystem of Web3, and I will benefit from that in all sorts of other ways as well, right? And so, like, really the issue we have, I think, in the US in particular, where we have no idea where our tax money goes, we don't really feel like it's being used for us. A lot of times it probably is doing great things for us, but we don't know that and we don't feel that. So I would say these are the three, right? It's financial capital, it's social capital, and then it's the actual return, it's the actual positive externalities of the public good itself. These are the three incentive models to get people to invest. It's also the three ways that you get a return on that investment. And I'll put out something provocative there, which is I think projects should aim for all three. I think if we really are serious about public goods and we really want to, fund this, we should do everything we can, and we should appeal to all three of those interests. But there's obviously a lot of catches that come along with that, where the richest investors are the ones who get the richest off of this as well, et cetera. So I would love pushback on that. And also just to know if people feel like one of these maybe three models is better than another. Alicia, also welcome. Thank you for joining us.
Hey,
we have
David.
so much to talk about.
David, one quick thought. Some of those models that you're talking about, there's a lot of psychology research that's been done around the four forms of motivation. Extrinsic motivation, identified motivation, intrinsic motivation, and introjected motivation. And there's sort of a spectrum. Like there's an onboarding ramp. In a past life, I worked with helping people reduce their energy consumption, partnered with utilities. And in that particular world, almost everybody starts with extrinsic motivation. I want to earn crypto. I'm willing to earn gift cards by taking some particular action. That's something that's really tangible that resonates with most humans, just generally speaking. The goal, though, is that's not sustainable in most situations. Even in crypto long term, I'd advocate that extrinsic motivation is not going to be sustainable as a means to fund public goods. The goal, though, has to be for us to move people from extrinsic through identified, through introjected, all the way to intrinsic motivation, where the motivation itself is coming from within and you understand the good that you're actually doing, and you don't need to be sort of chastised into doing it, feeling guilty. You don't need to have a community around you who's sort of peer pressuring you into it, and you don't need to actually be paid to take those actions either. So in the models that you're thinking of, I think it would be awesome, we could take a step back and really identify which of these motivations are we appealing to, and how do we move people through this spectrum from extrinsic motivation all the way through to intrinsic motivation, and identify specific program offerings that appeal to each person's step along the way, identify specific projects, and identify parts of the Gitcoin platform. This is what I think about on the Gitcoin side is, this is why we have a leaderboard, is to showcase build up competition, which is more in the identified competition space, the identified motivation space. So the Bounties platform fits the extrinsic motivation to get people in. So I think even on the public good side, there's a large opportunity to really just think through how do we continue to move people from extrinsic, just paying them, rewarding them, increasing the value that they get, to the intrinsic motivation, which is where a lot of this group actually is. We're here because we care, not because we're going to make a bunch of coins doing it, or not because we can peer pressure our friends into it, or that any of us are potentially being peer pressured into this. We're a collective that came together often without knowing each other. So there's an author, Dan Ariely, who has written a couple books about this, which are just fascinating. So if other folks are interested, I would love to talk through these models a bit more and just think through how can we align program offerings that move people from extrinsic motivation to sort of intrinsic motivation, where they're advocates for this work as well.
Kyle, I would love if you could share that book. This is a conversation I've been having with a lot of Web3 projects about this question of whether you can do a missionary to mercenary funnel or a mercenary to missionary funnel. And missionary to mercenary often seems to make the most sense because you get people who are there for the right reasons initially, and then you find incentive mechanisms to pay them for their work, but they're not just there for mercenary reasons. I know a lot of DAOs really prefer this, but I think there's a big issue there, which is that you're really appealing to people who have a lot of privilege and resources to be able to be invested in the first place without financial returns. And, if you look at stuff like Rabbit Hole or Axie and just the number of people they've onboarded to Web3 by offering purely mercenary top of sales funnel models, I think it is promising if you can then do what you talked about, Kyle, which is go from that external motivation to the intrinsic. And it's a hard problem because a lot of people really aren't there for those reasons. But it maps my own journey. I got into crypto because I thought it was a good financial opportunity, and then I started to see the social opportunity. I think is actually much greater, which is to do this with all of you. So Alicia and Andy, I'm really appreciative. You guys have both made it here. I think you guys have heard the most recent part, and I would love to hear from you both. And like Andy, I'm sure you in particular probably have a lot of pushback on the appeals to social capital as a way of funding public goods as well. So both your voices are super welcome here.
GM, I fell asleep reading Andy's piece. I actually read Andy's piece and then clicked on all the links and I couldn't stop reading. And so, and then my alarms didn't go off. And
how were your dreams?
Well, I slept so well on for a few hours. It was really great. Thank you. But Andy, oh my goodness, I would love to hear your thoughts.
Just on my camera there. My apologies for being late. The wind blew my Wi-Fi down, which is a sort of perennial problem on the east coast of Africa. Yeah, I think
glad you're here.
Yeah, it's good to see you all. I think, yeah, I really resonate with what you said, David. I must admit that the opportunity, I think, for a lot of us is to begin to really blur these boundaries between what's intrinsic and what's extrinsic, right? And that, like, what the real opportunity is to like creatively play with that boundary. It's not to deny that it exists and that there are very much like stuff which falls into the extrinsic motivation factors and things which fall into the intrinsic, but like where these two things meet and like examining that boundary is always where like the most interesting places are. If you go back to like Vitalik's posts of the 2020 roundup, he has this like wonderful photo of like monkeys on the guardrail of a road and a forest, and it's always the boundaries between worlds where like the most interesting things are happening, and he speaks about that in like a typically kind of Vitalik and technical way, which if you're interested in, it's the 2020 in review piece. But that notion has been one which has kind of like really influenced my own thinking and approach to these topics, and in particular, like, you know, my own kind of dream for this thing is to see, can we create spaces which are like simultaneously artistic and economic, right? When we have these like econo-linguistic networks, which is what a blockchain is in some sense, that like it takes language and it executes it deterministically across peers spread around the world sort of instantaneously, right, in a deterministic fashion, which is very interesting, and that allows us to like make economic statements that are simultaneously artistic expression. So you can like play with this boundary between intrinsic and extrinsic motivation. Like the way that I have kind of done this recently is by like writing a book, and each chapter is an NFT, and that NFT gives the owner or the guardian of that NFT the ability to update its token URI. You know, and like NFTs are supposed to be permanent. Why would you want to update a token URI? But you can do that because like we can play with these linguistic primitives, and all of a sudden somebody who owns those like NFTs which control the chapters in this book, they can like sell them, they can pass them on, they can do any number of things with it, but it's like simultaneously artistic expression and economic action. They're one and the same thing. And so like I think that it's always in like trying to find the ways of integrating these different approaches which are not possible in perhaps more traditional models out of which we all come, that like the most interesting work arises. It's in my experience, it's never been about like denying and saying like it should only be about intrinsic motivation. We want to live in this starry-eyed utopian world where everybody is just good. Like wonderful. Everybody on this call is probably that, right? But like also we also have like our dark days, and we're not always all good if we're like truly honest about it. And so like this approach where we say like, okay, yeah, like there needs to be extrinsic motivation, there needs to be intrinsic motivation. Where where do those two things come together is kind of like a lot of what I spend my time thinking about at a 10,000-foot level.
Andy, I might be totally bottleraizing this, but I think one takeaway from your piece for me is getting people into a mindset where value only accrues to society when you give it away, and there can actually be a positive return on that investment as well, right? That if you give away 50% of your money for it to become a functional currency in an ecosystem that's funding things, you'll probably get back much more than what you gave away. And finding that mode to also, I think, educate people as to public giving being an investment seems like a lot of the hard work to do, especially with Tragedy of the Commons, where you can know that's true, but still expect everyone else to do it so you don't have to. I'm dealing with this a bit in a DAO I'm in right now, where I'm trying to get everyone to give away half our tokens to create more diverse membership. And people are saying, well, if you want to do that, that's fine. And I was like, I mean, for me, it'll end up being the same if I do it. I get diluted, by 50% no matter what. But it does feel a little strange to be the only one doing it.
I think something really important to bring up here as well is like there are incentive structures that take part in like taking the extrinsic motivation and pushing it toward intrinsic good for a society. For example, like tax breaks for donations to charities, right? Like you have an incentive to do that work because the point of what you're doing is, oh, I gave a donation, and obviously like this whole system has gotten very broken. But like if you contribute to a particular charity, or you like what some people do, right? Like they give their art to a museum at a certain valuation. Like the incentive structure that underlies that is supposed to be you don't have to pay as much in taxes. And so there's the positive externality of that is supposed to be that the charity gets funding or the museum gets an art piece that's valuable. But the intrinsic motivation is a tax break. And so I think one of the things that that's just like one of those questions is also asking like, where's the acceptable loss? Where is it that you're willing to look at the work that is done on the fringes to bring energy into the system versus the work that how many people and how energetically dense the center of that system actually needs to be, right? So like the people at the center who are doing all of the work are the most energetically dense and the most connectively dense of the entire system. And then everyone at the fringes is responsible for bringing the energy into the system and allowing that system to use it however it needs to use it. So that's kind of what comes to mind here is like in terms of incentive structures, like sure, you can incentivize people with external motivation or extrinsic motivation. The question becomes like, do you necessarily need to on-ramp those people if like you don't necessarily need to on-ramp people who are bringing money into a system. If they're entirely extrinsically motivated, but the intrinsic goal of those who are operating the system is still accomplished, and you have good rails on making sure that that's not an exploitable system, then I think there's still something that can be done there, and it can really be a positive thing.
Axie is a great example of that. I have so many issues with Axie, but they probably onboarded more people into Web3 than any other protocol has, and it's purely external motivation. It's not easy onboarding either. You have to create 2 wallets, but it succeeded because there's financial incentives. So much at play. Alicia, I would love to hear from you as well. I think just the overarching question for us today is how do we monetize public goods? What's a sustainable model for that? And I think this goes to a deeper question I always have, which is how do we make stuff open source and free, but also somehow get workers paid for their work at the same time in that world. And I think some of the stuff you discuss in your piece, I think is really some of the best writing on this. And also a question I think for Gitcoin generally, which is if we're funding projects and then they use that funding to make a lot of money, do we deserve that? Are we the taxpayers who, like in Value of Everything, who have helped support Boeing and should get a return on that investment? What's our role here as well? So Alicia, I would love your thoughts because I know they've evolved since you've written that piece too.
Yeah, I think what's really interesting with Gitcoin is that even that example that you just gave, like there are a few instances of that happening already where it's like really easy to plug in the scenario of what would happen if the situation was different and you went through a grants round and then this happened, like X happened or Y happened. So I think that's a huge opportunity in terms of thinking about, say, like the future of grants rounds. I also think that it's really interesting thinking about like the financialization of things and Gitcoin starting from this like very intrinsically motivated, like socially good place. And something I took away from Andy's piece was that maybe that the say like extrinsic, which I used to equate to financial incentive, but now I'm wondering if there is like a shift where extrinsic doesn't have to equal financial, and that I don't know, there's just like a redefining of what is intrinsic and extrinsic and what is social and what is financial. But yeah, I think that I'm just slowly coming up to speed with the convo, and I wonder if I could jump in a bit later, but yeah, I think there are so many opportunities, and I feel like my preference, just like the default based on the like operating system that I came into this space with, is to like always monetize things, always financialize things, like always make money. But obviously, like I'm here, I like to do good things. Like I want to fund public goods, and so trying to bring those two things together, like you said. And I don't have any great solutions at the moment, but I feel like leaning into that, things that normally just rely on intrinsic motivators, leaning into extrinsic motivators more, and like what could we learn? Like what could Gitcoin learn from Axie? And like does that serve us? So I don't know. Sorry, no concrete thoughts.
No, what can Gitcoin learn from Axie is a great question. I think at least half the people on this call have not spoken, and we have 15 official minutes left, and then we can keep going if we want. But just again, Fred, Lee, Xian, Tua, Paul, we love Gary, everyone. We really love to hear from you guys as well.
I'll say something. But how people are diverse, right? And there's a lot of different reasons. We're covering all those. One of the things that I think about in like trying to design systems is not trying to be everything to everyone. And I like the diversity of options. So like Gitcoin leaning too heavily into trying to get financial returns, I think muddles the message that in just this example. Like if Gitcoin was focused on monetizing returns, I think that would muddle the message and make it less effective, less potent for the type of people that basically that we are, the people that are here for other reasons or more enlightened, like the idea that they're creating a public good, they don't need to see financial return, but it's better for Web3.
But are we being exploited then? Because other people are making money off of us at Gitcoin.
I don't think of it that way. No, I think like there's other channels of my life and Web3 and crypto where it's like focus on returns and do those. But I actually like segmenting those and not trying to be everything to everyone. And one of the beautiful things of Web3 is that you can join 5 DAOs, 3 DAOs, whatever. You can do that, and it's not like a monoculture where we're kind of like you're born in the country you're born in, and therefore like your government is the only thing, and so you need it to be everything to everyone. Kind of in the Web3 world, like you can have diversity and competition, and you can do all these different things, and they can try different strategies and embrace different parts of human psyche that are never going to change, and see what interesting results there are, and not be overly committed to just like one maximalist, like this is the end all be all for all of my needs.
Andy and Alicia, I think also because you guys are deep in kernel, you probably also have a lot of insight there into how you create this really incredible system of giving education to people in a moment where we're moving towards learn to earn and thinking about, as education as an investment as well, that DAOs and groups are making in people, or as public goods funding too, but also finding a sustainable model to carry that forward.
Yeah, again, Andy, I wonder what your thoughts are on education in terms of, like normally we, in Web3, we see like learn to earn outside of Web3 in real life. Like it's all, I feel like, destination driven incentives for education, as opposed to like journey driven incentives. So wondering like what your ideal version of like the motivation in education is, so I can implant the seeds into my daughter's mind.
Oh, dear, poor daughter, you gotta be careful. Yeah. I think I love I'm so sorry, was it some who just spoke? I'm kind of terrible at Discord calls, but this notion that Kevin, sorry, yeah. I really love that idea. I think it's really incredibly eloquent and well put, that we shouldn't try and be everything to everyone, and it speaks from like a wealth of experience. You know, there are a few things that maybe I can say. The first, I think, is I'll go from most complex to least complex, because I hate being complex, but there's one kind of thing which I would like to tackle here, which is that this difference between the way that intrinsic and extrinsic is shifting just by virtue of the internet, not even Web3, right? Is that as we recognize more and more in our daily lives, not in some abstract metaphysical sense, that we're all deeply connected, less and less stuff is extrinsic, right? Just by virtue of our experience, there's less and less things that are extrinsic, and it's now kind of very painfully obvious to many people around the planet that like that there are no externalities, right? And you see this kind of work reflected, in fact, in like the token engineering community, for instance, who are using Hamiltonian functions and various other things out of deep physics to map the increase in heat on the planet directly to liquidity injected into financial systems. Because we can take, we can draw some really interesting and strong kind of correlations, if not causation, between those two things. It's fascinating. So you can see this kind of work like bubbling up in some academic research where there's like no such thing as extrinsic anymore. But like it points also, as always, like in the external world, to things within ourselves, right? That's just as we're realizing there's no real extrinsic, the realization that arises mutually with that is that there's nothing which is truly everything is intrinsic, right? You're not who you think you are, and when you realize that this you that you think you are is so much more expansive than just the personality or the limited psyche, then again, when one recognizes that intrinsic is in fact a massively inclusive kind of category, right? And for me, this is one of the critical insights at the heart of the kernel and the way that it's structured, and what you're talking about in terms of gift giving, is that like, it only when crystals grow, you only need one little impurity in the substance for a seed to form around. The same thing happens when you break supersymmetry in physical systems. It's fascinating. You just need one tiny little impurity, and all of a sudden the whole system shifts, right? And this is captured in ancient wisdom, like Buddha says, like one flower blooms, and across the whole world it's spring. Right? It's exactly the same idea, just without the maths and physics to back it up. But he had the experience, and so like when you like have the courage and the honesty and the bravery to like give that gift, 50% of the tokens done. I don't care if anybody else does it. Not in this dismissive way, but because like I really deeply believe that this is the thing to do, then it has these non-linear and unpredictable effects. Kernel is a great example of that. I just gave the syllabus to Vivek because like it was the thing to do at the time. I wasn't really doing much else, and in fact, in the doing of that like gift, in making it, I actually realized the ultimate gift is to myself, because I was the one who needed this the most. I was longing for a place where there was like some coherent space of all of the stuff that I'd learned over 8 years. And that leads you deeper and deeper into this realization that nothing is truly extrinsic, and that the entire experience that I unfolds through is all intrinsic in some sense, right? That it's all happening in me, right? There's this wonderful story of a really fantastic Advaita Vedanta teacher in the UK, in Oxford, where I studied, his name is Rupert Spira, and he was sitting with his teacher at a very particular point in his training, and they were sitting outside a beautiful night, stars, kind of having this sort of discussion. A dog starts barking, and this guy says to Rupert, he says, "Where is the dog barking, Rupert?" Rupert says, "Over there." He says, "Where is the dog barking, Rupert?" In here, right? There's a funny kind of way of illustrating that in fact, when you begin this journey of gift giving, which is a deep part of cypherpunk culture, a big part of hackerdom in general, right? You begin more and more to realize that the biggest gift is to yourself. And then, in fact, this deepest kind of wisdom from particularly the Buddhist tradition, which comes in the Paramparamita, which is like the highest wisdom, the Diamond Sutra, where Buddha is talking to a disciple of his called Subhuti and asking him a series of questions. And at one stage they speak about gifts, and he says, "Can a bodhisattva give a gift?" And the answer that Subhuti gives is, no, a bodhisattva cannot give a gift if they still have the concept of a being. If you still think that I am separate and that I am the one doing the action of gift giving and there's somebody who is receiving it separate from me, it's not a true gift. Right? It's only when I lose that sense of separate self that the stream of generosity, which is life, can flow through uninhibited. So like that kind of realization, if it was just one person, has incredible ripple effects, that are very difficult to quantify, and yet like beyond saying like it's kind of what we're seeing with Kernel in these really unexpected ways, that like the more that this particular aspect of things unfolds for me, the less I'm interested in building for scale, because it again goes back to these very old kind of spiritual wisdoms of like, save yourself and blue skies extend forever. It's not a selfish thing. It's that like the whole point is not to change the world, but the eyes that see. And the more that we do that, then like all of the other things fall into place. You can't think about the whole thing first. You start with, like Carl has so beautifully done, like A and B. And maybe if you're really, really smart, which he is, so thank God, you can introduce C, and you can talk about triangles and have some really fun geometric things that happen as a result of that, and all of the metallic means pop out. And you're like, oh my God, I could write JavaScript with geometry. It's freaking mind-boggling. Carl is just... Also, because he has the most incredible mirror post about... amulets, which is just the coolest thing ever. Please go and collect a copy because it's the best. And it's that kind of thing that I think is really wonderful, because it's these little seeds around which crystallize entire cultures. And like, rather than doing the same thing that we've always been doing, which is building for scale, trying to affect the lives of 1 billion people. That's the last thing that I'll say. I'm sorry, I know I've been speaking for a long time. Is that like, have you ever tried truly serving just one other person, your lover or your wife? It's impossible. It's never enough. No matter what you do, it's never enough. It's just one person, right? You want to serve 1 billion people. Are you sure? It's a lot. So anyway, that's kind of something I reflect on.
Oh, that just makes me think of something that I saw. I just saw this graphic on Twitter, and it was like the things in red are the things that the government looks after. So it's like healthcare, education, and the price has gone up and say the quality has gone down. And then the blue things are things that have like the private sector has kind of innovated and competes in, which is like electronics and software and technology and all these things. But I was just thinking that oh no, I lost my train of thought. Wait, stop. What was I thinking?
In the US, it's all blue. There's no red. So we don't have that. It's all private.
Oh yeah. Oh, that's right. Which is this idea that like governments are made to like serve the public, and the public is everyone. And so like, where do you end up then? But then like, say you take like a startup in tech or outside tech, and we always talk about like serving one niche, like serve a very specific niche, like Facebook is college dorm rooms or whatever it is, or whatever it is, and then you scale outwards, but then I feel like what Andy is saying is like, what if you don't have to scale outwards? Like just generally like serving a niche seems to be, if everyone just serves their niche, I don't, yeah. So that's one thought. The other thought is like, I actually like completely disagree with like the position that we can have like many different DAOs to be a part of. We can like get our social interaction from one place and our financial kind of means from another place. I feel like for me, it needs to come from the same place. I am not going to survive in this world of many DAOs. I'm like a one DAO every day, 24/7, 365 kind of gal. And so
You're monogamous DAO.
I'm like 100% on team monogamy, and that extends to DAOs for me. And so it's like this question of like exploitation versus being like extrinsically motivated. Another thing I would just like to get people's thoughts on is just like in terms of like the starting points and like whatever the seed is and the impact, even just on a few people, not even scaling, but like we have like Gitcoin as an example. What does it look like compared to like SHIB or a dog token, where it's like trash in terms of like intrinsic motivators but makes a lot of money, and then what can you do? Or alternatively like A16Z, it's like very financialized, like it's all about money, unless I'm wrong, like in terms of a starting point. Like the whole point is to get a return on investment, right? To invest, but now they have lots of money, so they could start being very like socially aware or pro-social with their money. But just in terms of like how everything maps out, like what's the best way to do it? This is something that literally keeps me up at night, which is I used to live, and I have lived for a long time by like the maxim, make money then make a difference, because I felt so powerless in my life without having money, not being able to impact anything. And like my biggest pain with Kernel is the thought that like without the funds to be able to cover basic things, but also like to be able to remunerate the people involved, that this gift would stop. Like it would just, as much as Andy would want it continue, like if there are no funds, like it literally stops. Can you imagine now that you know about it? And so I just like, I don't know, that stuff. And so I'm like, oh my gosh, if there are people like Andy, is there something that we can do where I can just go out and make money the old way for Andy? But now I'm trying to figure out in this new Web3 world, like, are there ways to differently about having like that financial flow, that like the capital flowing, as well as all of the good stuff.
Guys, we're currently at noon ET, which means we're at the hour. So if you need to go, we understand. I would like to stick around and keep this conversation going for anyone who would like to keep going, at least for another 15 minutes. But if you have to go, totally understand. And please feel free to leave notes as well. You know, if you're not comfortable speaking or you just have side thoughts, like that, it's welcome. And like everything we're talking about is sharing, right? So I think like just don't hesitate at all. At all to share. Alicia, what you're talking about is just something I've been thinking about so much recently, which is, you know, where does value accrue? And I think learn to earn has really been, I've worked in ed tech for 10 years, and it's just been so eye-opening to me to realize that education is usually a form of exploitation because you are getting people to learn things that will benefit others more than it will benefit them. Now, it can benefit them too. It'll get you a job, it'll get you opportunity, but often that's very vocational, and often those exploitative jobs where the value is really accruing to someone else much more. And I think part of what's valuable to me about learn to earn is saying this should be funded because the education that you're giving someone, that gift that you're giving them, is you're planting a seed in a much broader ecosystem where value accrues so much more to everyone else from that one person's education than it will ever accrue to them. And finding those kinds of models, that's what I've been playing with this book club model, is that DAOs might pay members to do book clubs because of the value that it creates for the DAO and giving a social foundation for community and the insights it generates in being able to draw people in. And I think it can be one of those things where you have the external motivation of getting paid, but that's really just about getting you over the hump of opportunity cost, that you might have spent your time doing all these other things and now you'll spend it doing this because it's worth it. but it's actually also the thing you really would want to be doing anyway, and now you can afford to do it as well. So I think if we come to these, questions from a point of thinking, the people we really want to attract are not the people in the current ecosystem. The people we want to attract are the people who don't have privilege, who can't make a decision to learn because there's an opportunity cost of what they could be doing financially otherwise. We might be able to also really create a more accessible system as well. Sorry, that's my own rant here.
Yeah. Oh, go ahead, Alicia.
No. You go ahead, please.
Yeah.
All three of us. I think, like when we think about, and I've had this conversation with a few of you on here, but when we think about the DAOs as the new, and I don't even like to use the word the new nation state, but like if we think about the new DAOs as the new institution, the new company, the new nonprofit, like, and we think about how these organizations can be structured to really take care of its members and its contributors. Like there's just all of these really beautiful localized, and I mean like digitally localized to this community, solutions that we can create to meet everyone's needs. And then instead of like, trying to create this globalized system that meets everyone's needs, we can create these flexible prototypes from within these smaller organizations that take care of people in the ways of like pay to earn or a DAO-based income, these kinds of novel concepts that can be orchestrated on a smaller scale and tested out, and then potentially replicated elsewhere in other communities and adapted to their unique needs and what their members are seeking to fulfill for their members. But there's just like so many interesting opportunities to play with that of like how we can really take care of people through these structures and use our, again, like what is money for? What are we trying to accomplish here? Instead of trying to create this like large scale transformation, to start really small within our own communities and experiment there and see what works and what people are actually benefited from, and then take it from there.
I couldn't have said that better, Lonnie. And I think that goes to Andy's point as well. Andy gave us the most beautiful monologue of all time, and then I didn't respond to it. But I think, sustainability often means thinking small as well, right? Not necessarily, but often. And I think these pod models, like I just keep thinking that DAOs, the way for them to grow is to replicate and like cells, not to expand. That if we can have these models of pods, right? I think Orca Protocol is really working on this in a really interesting way. Like, then you can create these much smaller communities that are much closer and are sustainable, of people who know each other and have the social foundation and can take care of each other. I don't know if anyone's watched the films of Frederick Wiseman, but in his second half of his career, he really devotes himself to documentaries about these almost sustainable public institutions that are run as collectives. And I think part of the reason that they often are successful is because they're 8 or 9 people who know each other and spend all their time together. They are monogamous within a group, Alicia. So definitely to your point as well. I personally am polyamorous with my DAOs, so but it's hard. It's hard.
I think I want to. There's like a couple of things that I've been really thinking about lately too that deliver in this situation, and one of the things that like I know is always present in these conversations when we have our library conversations is reflecting on Ostrom's impact on our thinking. And it's like right at the beginning of her Nobel Prize winning book, she talks about how hyperlocality is the only way you can sustain any like I can't remember the acronym, but like the commonly held ground, right? Like if you stay local, you can manage it. If it grows too big and too many people are using it, then it gets really hard to manage. It becomes highly complicated. But I think the other function of this, and this is something like I've touched on a couple times, and then I know that Andy just brought it up in such a beautiful way that I just wish I could like listen to over and over again, is this idea of like creating the crystal seed, right? Creating the grain of sand that makes the pearl. And that can be so dense, and it can be the most important thing, and it becomes like this mechanism that creates so much more outside of the interaction. But you still concentrate on the seed. You still concentrate on the grain of sand. It's like that William Blake poem, like to see the world in a grain of sand and have it in a wildflower. It's like obsess over the scale at which you are choosing to operate and obsess over the beauty of that scale and recognize that the impact of that scale is going to grow just as a result of how much density is in that small piece. And so I've been thinking a lot about like the idea of like forking and derivatives, and seeing that those grow new things. Like like you had like the Bored Ape Yacht Club, and then you had the Mutant Apes Yacht Club. I don't know if they were made by the same thing, but it's a derivative. And the fact of the matter is, the new derivative also grew off to become its new thing. And so derivations that allow you to winnow off pieces of an old system that has grown too much and become unmanageable also allows you to iterate continuously. And so then, things that become less relevant become less useful. And then those nodes can become external to the system and less important to the system. But I think the most important thing is to work small and work densely. And that is what creates the most value, is like that internal alignment of ontology and narrative and it's just like, this internal ontology and narrative that just brings everyone together, this common culture that allows everyone to think simultaneously and collectively, and as a result create thoughts that are bigger than any given individual person.
Guys, we're almost out of time, I think, but still some people we haven't heard from on the call. So I did want to just invite anyone who hasn't spoken. If you have anything you want to share, anything you want to ask, John.
Yeah, I can jump in real quick. First of all, thank you so much. Everyone is so thoughtful here. It's really a privilege to be able to share ideas and converse right now. I think that it's the ethos of experimentation in this space is so important. And it's such a massive design space that it's really open to so many different directions that it can go in. And I'm thinking about this idea of the gift. A gift can also be the imposition of a social debt. So for me, I think the real question again and again is just how do we prevent, how do we keep ourselves from reproducing the systems that we're coming from? So it's a question of intentionality, and being able to get together and speak about these things is really important on a continual basis. And on circling back on ClimaDAO, I think it's really important to pay attention to what's going on in DeFi and to experiment with derivatives or with bonding curves or whatever. But it will be interesting to see what happens. Like if those yields collapse, or if there isn't really a stickiness to that protocol. Like, for example, will people really care about carbon credits in the long term? That project could just quickly fail. And my guess is that the people who are speculating on those carbon credits don't really care about carbon credits. So, yeah, not a fully formed thought, but just I think the question of intentionality and experimenting while being intentional about the end result, I think, is important.
Not to show my own work, but to show my own work. The essay that we put out yesterday for EcoDAO is actually about gift economies and what I've been thinking about is intentionality versus permissionless environments. That permissionless environments are a huge unlock for us because they allow anybody to create, but that doesn't mean everybody does create, right? Because the people who actually will create are the ones who have the privilege, the time, the resources, the risk tolerance to get into these spaces. And so permissionless is, I think, a 10x advancement on the kind of meritocratic systems or supposedly meritocratic systems we've had before. But I think an intentional system is 10x on permissionless, because it really allows us to be really thoughtful in creating diverse teams of people who can support each other. And I think this is what you were saying, Pan. help each other think at a level they couldn't think on their own as well.
I'll jump in to say something.
I think,
sorry. The thing I've been reflecting on throughout this conversation, kind of coming back to the definition of public good, is this idea that public goods are a process more than a destination. As somebody who spent the better part of my life sort of in the boom and bust cycle of applying for grants in the environmental nonprofit world, one of the big problems, and I think this kind of ties into why it's tough to get funding for networks or for communities a lot of the time, is because it's not always easy to measure the outcomes, especially when you're taking on large problems like climate. What we measure as success becomes a big question mark. And, I was really interested by many aspects of what came out of these articles and this conversation in terms of sort of the internal processes and the sort of segmentation of, the change that we're looking at making into cells as opposed to one large entity. And I think the more that we can get on the same page about some of these benchmarks, some of the things that we're trying to accomplish, whether they're sort of, done as one large collective or in cells, and I think the more likely we are to sort of move forward in a way that truly reflects public goods. And I think the better we are at sort of measuring what those benchmarks are in ways that go beyond just dollars and cents or ETH and GWE, the more likely we are to, get to a place where we can make the right kinds of decisions about where to put our resources, because even just sort of knowing what public goods to throw our collective support behind, needs to be about more than just, which influencer has the most followers on Twitter or whatever it might be. I think this is a super rich conversation and also just sort of interjecting incomplete thoughts, but I just wanted to say thank you for the space that was created here for that anyway.
Thank you, Ben.
One of the things to think about in that particular regard, which is a wonderful point, is that dollars and cents are really the only linguistic primitives that you have in the current financial system by which to measure impact, and that's no longer true in these networks, right? We have, as you say, GWE, but also non-fungible tokens. We have, in fact, a world of Turing complete primitives that we can build for that kind of measurement. And so the question again is just how creative can you be with the programs that you instantiate? And again, I'll just reference Best Ape sitting there quietly and his wonderful mirror post, because if you ever want to look at real, what did you call it? It's code as poetry, but there was a very particular word that you use, cryptopoetics. There we go. That is just incredible. So I love that, and it speaks, I think, to his, in particular, deep understanding of this notion of linguistic primitives, the way that it can be used. And it speaks, I think, just a little bit also to what Pan is saying, right, that, and John, right, that's when we give gifts, as you say, they can be held as social debts, right, but there are two counterbalances to that. The first is the logic of anticipation. It's about exercising the rational mind to try and understand before the gift is given how it might be interpreted, and that feeds back into the way in which you give it, such that it's more likely to be interpreted as gift rather than debt. But there's also the second aspect to it, which is about the unpredictable nature of any human-to-human interaction, which is humility. You're never in control of the final outcome. And that's what the Buddha is saying in the Paramparamita, right? He's saying that if there's still a sense of you and other in which that act of gift giving is occurring, then it's not true gift, because there's always this possibility of death. It's only without separation, when the five skandhas are completely empty, that you can really have the generosity flow. And it's one thing that I just want to mention very briefly, David, is that humility is such an interesting word, right? It comes from the Latin humus, it means earth. And very, very particularly, the layer of earth in which things decay, right? It is the layer of the forest that trees fall down into, decay, and it's that death out of which new growth comes. We are humble, right? What is humility? Humility is seeing everybody the same as you, no different at all, right? That's real humility. No difference in how you see another human being. And that's because we all share the same nourishment. The same layer of dead stuff that feeds us all. And I think that like one of the aspects of this that is kind of important to think about in the context of this call is that like we've been using this language of think small. That's not what I was saying, right? When I say like focus on the self, because that self that I'm talking about, which is where everything is intrinsic, is cosmic. It's the biggest there is. It's beyond big. Right? The impulse to say think small is wonderful because it's about humility, but it's not actually representative of the reality of self, right? It's not representative of that particular insight, which recognizes every single other being as the same because we share the same nourishment. And when we artificially decrease our own importance, because we're acting with humility, that's a superficial kind of humility, right? There's something much deeper at play, which is the seeing of sameness in all things. That is at the heart of humility, and it's really interesting to kind of think about, particularly in the context of gift giving, because if we're all the same, what is there to give and who is there to receive? These two things play a big role in my life, like the logic of anticipation, exercising the rational mind to its greatest capacity in order to try and like navigate the world of space and time, but also having the courage to get to the edge of that and give up. Literally, think of the word "give up." It's such a beautiful thing, give up because we're humble.
Indeed, I think we should close there. I don't think. I'm certainly not going to improve on that. Just the idea also that decay humbles us, and it's also the process of decay in which we become each other. In that humbling process is something that I can relate to quite a bit. I'll close out with one quote at Shelley, saying that poets are the unacknowledged legislators of the world, and I think there's always a question, with crypto poetics, that we now live in a world where devs and engineers are very much the unacknowledged legislators of the world, literally with smart contracts. But what are the poetics of those smart contracts? I think it's a great question for next time as well. Thank you everyone for coming out to this. I feel bad that we didn't record this. This feels like this was a public gift to give somewhere, but I think
I recorded it. Don't worry.
Oh, we did. Okay, great. Okay, good. So we have this for the future. This is a gift to me. I'm so grateful for everyone. Thank you so much again, and we can always keep the conversation going in the chat as well. But thank you so much.
Thanks everyone.
Thank you.
An amazing discussion.